Unions. Now, assuming you're Gen Z, that means you know about unions from one of two places: Red Dead Redemption, or from those Adam Conover TikToks where he's walking back and forth in front of the Netflix building. And both of those are completely valid. But what are unions? Why do they exist? How do they exist? And when will they stop existing, says Jeff Bezos. So the unions you're thinking of from today haven't always been around. Today's unions come from the late 1800s and the early 1900s during the workers' rights era of American history. However, their history is actually a little bit older, considering they come from the guilds of like Europe and like the old world, like Rome and Greece and stuff. I know geography. At the start of unions here in America, union members were constantly harassed by their employers because unions had little to no protections at all. Probably one of the most famous ways they would do this was by bringing in union busters. Famously, the Pinkertons. Now, if you know anything about Pinkerton history, you know that their history is filled with them doing a lot of terrible shit, but is also filled with them every so often doing some pretty cool shit too. Now, if you want to see an example of one of the more sinister encounters with the Pinkertons, on November 5th, 1916, in Everett, Washington, 5 people were killed and around 30 people were critically injured by the Pinkertons at a union protest. During what is now called Bloody Sunday, a number of labor organizers got together and were opposed by local law enforcement, and the Pinkertons were brought in to shut them down. However, the most infamous encounter probably comes from 1892 with the Homestead Strike, where there were 16 killed by the Pinkertons. With all that into consideration, the question arises, are unions that bad? Now, it depends on who you ask. If you ask Jeff Bezos, he's probably going to tell you no. He's probably going to say some stuff about how the workplace is supposed to be a family. Now listen, some of you out there might be thinking, oh, thuffer and thuffatash. I wouldn't want to be a communist. And to that I say, unions aren't communist. What's the difference between a bunch of people consolidating their labor and a bunch of companies consolidating their resources? If people willingly choose to be a part of a union to make their labor more valuable by making it more scarce, then yeah, what's the problem with that? That's not communism. That's the economics of capitalism, supply and demand. Now, obviously, there are some actual cons of unions. Sometimes you have to pay into the union because unions aren't free. Because there are legal fees, and then there are like medical fees, and then there's like retirement stuff. And so you pay for a union. That's part of it. There's less work autonomy. You have less control over yourself. But in a certain way, you know, did you have it before? That one's kind of up in the air. What about the pros? Union members make more, on average making 1.3 million more over the course of their career than non-union members. And if you took 2 people from the same industry and one was a union member and one wasn't, odds are the person in the union is making 20 to 35% more money than the non-union member. Better working conditions. Often people who are in labor unions tend to work in better conditions and seem to be happier with their employment. If you're like me, it's at this point that you start to ask the question, why aren't more people in a union? And it's because companies are still using the exact same tactics they always have. Now, yes, it is true, union busting today is technically illegal. However, those regulations only apply to the company itself. This has led to a practice where companies will hire outside consultant lawyers who are anti-union trust busters. The whole legal process of how they're actually allowed to do it still baffles me. I think they're just lying. Remember, kids, legalese was a language made up by rich people to keep poor people confused. So if you get the opportunity, should you join a union? Honestly, that's a personal choice. And it really depends on the person. Even if unions do grow in popularity, unions aren't for everyone. Some people like to negotiate their own contracts and feel that they don't need or want to have the contracts set by the union. And for those people, it's a fine choice and their right to do so. But I hope you know something about unions that you didn't learn from an Adam Conover TikTok or a video game.